On a random Tuesday morning, I did what I've done for years now. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other. I opened my investment account before the day really started. No excitement, no expectations, just a habit. And that's when I noticed something that made me pause longer than usual. While I was asleep, while I was getting ready for the day, while I was about to sit down and put in a full 8 hours of work, my money had already made more than I was going to take home that day. Not by some crazy margin, not enough to brag about, just enough to feel unsettling. I did the math in my head without even trying. After taxes, my paycheck for that day would be smaller. And in that quiet moment, standing in my kitchen, I realized something most people never do. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a one-off. This was a pattern starting to form. It took me a long time to understand what I was actually looking at in that moment, because no one ever gives it a name, but it has one. It's called the crossover point, the moment when the money you've already built starts working harder than you do. Not enough to quit yet, not enough to feel safe, but enough that the direction quietly changes. And here's the part that still bothers me after all these years. Most people will work for 40 or 50 years and never even realize this moment exists. They'll trade hours for dollars until their body slows down, then hope Social Security and whatever they manage to save is enough. They never see the line forming. They never feel it crossing. And once you understand that this moment is real, everything about money starts to look different. Once I understood that the crossover point was real, the entire picture simplified itself. Your financial life isn't complicated. It's just two lines moving in opposite directions. The first line is what it costs you to live. Your rent or mortgage, groceries, transportation, insurance, the quiet subscriptions you forgot you were paying for, the lifestyle that slowly expanded without you noticing. For most American households, that line sits somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 a month, and it has a nasty habit of creeping upward. The second line is your investment income, the money your money makes for you through dividends, interest, and long-term growth. For most people starting out, that line is flat, almost invisible, maybe a few dollars a month, easy to dismiss. But the entire game is played in the space between those two lines, and once you see them clearly, you stop asking how much you make and start asking where those lines are headed. This is where most people quietly give up, usually without realizing that they've done it. Because in the beginning, investing feels deeply unrewarding. You put money aside month after month, and nothing dramatic happens. Your portfolio moves up a little, then down a little. One good week gets erased by a bad one. It feels like effort without feedback, and the human brain hates that. I remember looking at my account years ago and thinking, this can't possibly be worth it. A few $1,000s earning a few percent doesn't change your life. It barely changes your month. And that's exactly why so many people stop here. What they don't see is that investment growth doesn't move in a straight line. Compound interest isn't linear. It's exponential. At first, the curve is almost flat, so flat it looks broken. But time is doing quiet work in the background. Every contribution stacks on the last one. Every reinvested dollar starts pulling its own weight. And then, without warning, the slope changes. The line that felt lifeless begins to bend upward, not because you suddenly got smarter or luckier, but because you stayed in the game long enough for math to take over. And if I'm being honest, this is the moment where a lot of people mentally check out. You finally run the numbers all the way through and realize that, at a modest investment rate, the crossover point doesn't arrive early. It shows up around the same age everyone else talks about retirement, 65, maybe a little sooner if things go well. At first glance, it feels underwhelming, like all this discipline just leads you back to the same place. I remember thinking, so this is it? And that's exactly when most people miss the most important part of the story. What most people never realize is that the crossover point isn't a fixed destination. It's not a number carved in stone. It moves. And it moves based on two things you actually control: your investments and your expenses. In that earlier scenario, the slow one, the math assumes you keep living the same way while investing just enough to feel responsible. But life doesn't have to stay optimized for comfort. When you reduce what it costs you to live, the crossover point shifts toward you. When you invest more aggressively, the curve steepens faster. And when you do both at the same time, something powerful happens. Years disappear, not symbolically, literally. Cutting $1,000 a month from your expenses doesn't just save you money today, it lowers the amount of wealth you need forever. And every additional dollar you invest isn't just another contribution, it's another worker you've hired that never sleeps. This is the moment when the math stops feeling passive and starts feeling cooperative. This is the part no spreadsheet ever warns you about. When you first start investing, every dollar feels fragile. It feels like something you're giving up, not something you're building. You notice every market dip. You feel every loss more than the gains. A good month barely registers, and a bad one sticks in your chest. That's normal. That's the cost of starting. But somewhere along the way, something changes. It's different for everyone, but I've seen it happen again and again, usually somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 invested. Suddenly, the numbers feel real. A 2% move isn't pocket change anymore. It's rent, it's groceries, it's a week of your life. That's when compound interest stops being a concept and starts feeling alive. And your relationship with work begins to shift long before you reach the crossover point. You don't feel free yet, but you feel less trapped. When your investments cover a car payment, you breathe differently. When they cover groceries, you negotiate differently. This gradual shift is what I call the freedom gradient. You don't wake up free one day. You slowly gain the power to say no, and that changes everything. There's another milestone most people never hear about, even though it can change how you live years before the crossover point arrives. It's often called coast fire, and all it really means is this. You've invested enough that, even if you never add another dollar, time alone will carry you to financial independence. At that point, the pressure lifts, not because you're done, but because the outcome is no longer in doubt. You've already punched the ticket. You can keep pushing if you want to, or you can slow down. You can choose work you enjoy. You can buy back time without fear. That optionality is powerful, and it arrives much earlier than most people expect if they stay consistent long enough. Whenever I talk about this, I already know what comes next, because I've asked myself the same questions. What about market crashes? What about inflation? What if everything goes wrong at the worst possible time? These aren't stupid fears. They're reasonable concerns. Markets are volatile. They always have been. You will live through downturns where your portfolio drops 20, 30, even 40%. That's not a flaw in the system. That is the system. Those drops are already baked into the long-term averages everyone quotes. The real risk isn't volatility. The real risk is needing your labor forever. When markets fall during the accumulation phase, you're not losing progress. You're buying future income at a discount. That only works if you don't panic and sell. And understanding the crossover point gives you something most people never have during those moments: a reason to stay calm. You're not watching numbers for entertainment. You're watching the gap between two lines slowly close, and temporary setbacks don't change where that math is heading. Understanding all of this doesn't help you if it never changes what you do next. So this is where I always bring it back to something simple. Start by figuring out what your life actually costs. Not the version you tell yourself, but the real number. Go through a few months of statements and add everything up. Most people are shocked by what they find. Once you have that monthly number, turn it into an annual one. Then multiply it by 25. That's your crossover number at a 4% withdrawal rate. That's the portfolio size where work becomes optional. Then look at where you are today. The distance between those two numbers is your gap. That gap isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to give you clarity. From there, the only real question is how you want to shorten the timeline. Earn more, spend less, invest the difference. Every $1,000 you invest buys you $40 a year of freedom forever. And every recurring expense you cut permanently lowers the finish line. Here's the way I think about money now, and once this clicks, it's very hard to unsee. Every purchase has two costs: the price you pay today and the time you give up later. When you spend an extra $15,000 upgrading a car, you're not just buying leather seats and a nicer badge. You're pushing your crossover point further into the future. At an 8% return, that $15,000 doesn't stay $15,000. It quietly doubles. Then it doubles again. Over time, that decision can cost you years of freedom. I'm not saying never enjoy your money. I'm saying understand the trade. Money isn't just money. It's future time. It's mornings you don't have to rush. It's work you get to choose instead of tolerate. Most people never see this connection, so every dollar that comes in goes right back out. But once you see the crossover point, you start asking a different question. With every decision, am I buying something today, or am I selling a piece of my future?